Kursk Oblast, a border region in southwestern Russia, has emerged as a central focus in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia during September 2025. This area, spanning approximately 30,000 square kilometers and directly bordering Sumy Oblast in Ukraine, has been the site of intense military operations since the start of the Ukrainian incursion in August 2024. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, Ukrainian forces have maintained positions in Kursk despite Russian efforts to reclaim territory, with limited advances in counterattacks resulting in significant losses for both sides. The battle for Kursk marks a shift in the conflict's dynamics, as Ukraine has transitioned from a defensive stance to cross-border offensive operations, exposing vulnerabilities in Russian defenses and forcing Moscow to redirect resources from other fronts. The origins of this phase trace back to August 2024, when Ukrainian forces, including the 95th Air Assault Brigade, crossed the border and entered Kursk Oblast. Independent analyses indicate that this initial incursion involved attacks on Russian positions in areas like Malaya Lokhnya, where Ukrainian troops conducted assault and clearing operations. By September 2025, the conflict in Kursk has evolved, with Russia launching counteroffensives supported by North Korean troops and elite units. Reports from the New York Times suggest that Ukraine lost control over parts of Kursk in the spring of 2025 due to sustained Russian assaults, but has maintained modest counterattacks in the northeast near Sumy Oblast. These efforts have included airstrikes and drone attacks targeting Russian ammunition depots and logistical bases, aimed at disrupting supply lines that sustain the Russian offensive in the Donbass. From a military perspective, Kursk Oblast is strategic due to its role in Russian supply routes. The region facilitates the movement of troops and equipment toward the Eastern Front, including the Pokrovsk sector, where the Ukrainian General Staff reported over 90 Russian attacks in a single day on September 22, 2025. Russia has deployed units such as the 8th Marine Brigade, known for its operations in Mariupol and Crimea, to reinforce defenses in Kursk. However, Ukraine has exploited gaps in these formations, utilizing satellite intelligence and drones for precise strikes. A notable example is the downing of a Russian Orion drone on September 14, 2025, near the Kursk border, a key asset for reconnaissance and airstrikes. This incident, confirmed by Ukrainian sources, highlights the vulnerability of Russian aviation in the area, where Ukraine has employed anti-aircraft systems and FPV drones to neutralize threats. Russian advances in Kursk have been limited, according to ISW assessments from September 19, 2025, which note ongoing offensive operations but without significant territorial gains. Russia has responded with internal censorship, silencing critics of its handling of the Ukrainian incursion, suggesting tensions within the military command. On the Ukrainian side, the strategy has involved not only defense but also counterattacks in Sumy Oblast, where Russian forces attacked on September 18 without notable progress. These exchanges have resulted in civilian and military casualties, with Ukraine reporting Russian attacks on residential areas, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis along the border. From an operational standpoint, Ukraine has integrated Western technology into its tactics in Kursk. Satellites like Starlink provide real-time data to map Russian positions, enabling surgical strikes against depots and command posts. On September 21, 2025, the ISW reported that Russia continues offensive operations in northern Sumy, but Ukraine has maintained the initiative in parts of Kursk using drones and artillery. This asymmetry is evident in the Russian Rubicon unit, an elite drone group that has wreaked havoc on Ukrainian positions, but which Ukraine has countered with ambushes and shootdowns. Independent sources estimate that Russian losses in Kursk since August include dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, with a cumulative value exceeding $500 million, though exact figures vary due to informational opacity. The broader context of September 2025 reveals a general escalation. While Russia presses in Pokrovsk and other fronts, Ukraine has diversified its operations, including strikes in Crimea, where on September 22, 2025, Ukrainian intelligence claimed damage to 2 Russian amphibious aircraft for the first time. In Kursk, this diversification manifests in combined operations: intelligence to identify targets, drones for initial strikes, and artillery for follow-up. Russia, meanwhile, has intensified attacks in Sumy, with reports of limited advances on September 18. These efforts reflect Russia's strategy of attrition, but Ukraine has demonstrated resilience, holding positions despite the enemy's numerical superiority. In economic and logistical terms, Kursk Oblast serves as a hub for transporting Russian munitions and fuel. Disruptions in this area, such as those caused by Ukrainian strikes, have forced rerouting that increases costs and delays. ISW analyses from September 19 highlight that Russia censors internal criticism of its handling of Kursk, indicating political pressures. For Ukraine, Kursk presents an opportunity to alleviate pressure on other fronts, such as the northeast, where modest counterattacks occurred in September 2025. The battle continues, with Ukraine calculating its moves to maximize impact at minimum cost. The Ukrainian preparation for operations in Kursk Oblast during September 2025 involved a meticulous combination of intelligence, logistical planning, and tactical training designed to exploit the vulnerabilities identified in Russian positions. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian forces have maintained an operational presence in the region, particularly in the Glushkovo district, which allowed for the continuous collection of data on Russian movements. This preparatory phase, which extended from late August to mid-September, focused on integrating Western technology with local capabilities, prioritizing surgical strikes against high-value targets, such as logistical centers and Russian elite brigades. The approach was not improvised, it was based on lessons learned from previous operations in the region, where Ukraine has demonstrated the ability to hold positions despite continuous Russian pressure. The process began with intelligence gathering. Ukrainian sources, backed by satellites like Starlink, provided real-time images of Russian positions in Kursk, including the deployment of the 810th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, a key unit for Russian counteroffensives. On September 18, 2025, units from the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, SOF, conducted a nighttime attack on a logistical center of this brigade in the Kursk region, using drones to record and confirm impacts on storage facilities. These preliminary strikes served as proof of concept, validating the effectiveness of low approach routes and the use of electronic decoys to evade Russian anti-aircraft systems like the Tor M2. Intelligence was not limited to satellite imagery. It included analysis of open-source intelligence, OSINT, and intercepts of Russian communications, which revealed patterns in the brigade's deployments, such as concentrations in areas like Sudzha and Lgov, where defenses were less dense due to the redistribution of resources toward the Donetsk front. In terms of logistical planning, Ukraine coordinated the deployment of modified FPV drones from positions in Sumy Oblast, about 100 kilometers from the border. Reports indicate that these drones, equipped with 50-kilogram warheads and inertial navigation systems, were transported in camouflaged civilian vehicles to avoid detection. The preparation included simulations based on data from previous strikes, such as the downing of a Russian Orion drone on September 14 near the Kursk border, which revealed weaknesses in enemy air coverage. The Ukrainian command, according to ISW assessments from September 20, 2025, adjusted tactics for operations in northern Sumy, where modest Ukrainian advances allowed for safer launch positions. Logistically, Ukraine faced challenges such as maintaining supply chains through exposed corridors, but mitigated this through local drone production in improvised factories in Kharkiv and Poltava, where hundreds of units are assembled weekly using commercial components. This ensures a steady flow, with emphasis on modularity for quick field repairs.
The training of the involved units focused on asymmetric operations. The Ukrainian SOF, responsible for the strike on the 810th Brigade on September 19, received training in the use of drones for reconnaissance and coordinated attacks, integrating satellite intelligence data for precise targeting. This approach enabled the execution of nighttime attacks, minimizing risks to Ukrainian personnel and maximizing disruption to Russian supply lines. Independent sources confirm that these preparations included scenario modeling with local wind and weather conditions, essential for drone flights in open terrain like that of Kursk. Additionally, the training incorporated joint exercises with NATO allied advisors, focused on integrating systems like HIMARS for follow-up strikes, although in Kursk, drones were prioritized to avoid escalations with long-range missiles. An example of this preparation is the drill conducted in August 2025 at bases near Sumy, where units practiced ambushes against simulated convoys, replicating Russian formations observed in OSINT. From a strategic perspective, the Ukrainian preparations sought not only material damage but also logistical disruptions. The ISW reported on September 21, 2025, that Russia suffered between 32,000 and 48,000 monthly casualties from January to July 2025, a context that underscores Ukraine's need to force Russian redirections. In Kursk, this translated into identifying gaps in Russian formations, such as the limited offensive operations reported on September 18 in the Kupiansk direction. Ukraine coordinated with allies for drone and missile supplies, ensuring operational sustainability. For instance, deliveries of electronic components from the US and Poland facilitated the production of jamming-resistant drones tested in previous strikes against the Russian Rubicon unit, an elite drone group that has wreaked havoc on Ukrainian positions, but which Ukraine has countered with ambushes and shootdowns. This international coordination, though discreet, has been crucial. Reports from the Kyiv Post on September 21 highlight how shared intelligence allowed anticipation of Russian movements in Kursk, similar to operations in Zaporizhia, where Russian advances were halted on September 20th. The final phase of preparation culminated in the authorization of specific strikes, such as the one on September 19 against the 810th Brigade, where drones confirmed impacts on ammunition depots. These strategic calculations, based on accumulated intelligence, allowed Ukraine to maintain the initiative in parts of Kursk despite Russian numerical superiority. However, not everything was perfect. Challenges like Russian jamming and the wooded terrain of Kursk Oblast required real-time adjustments, such as the use of alternative routes mapped via inertial GPS. Additionally, the preparation included counterintelligence measures. Ukrainian units operated in small cells to avoid infiltrations, learning from previous incidents in Belgorod, where Russia captured intact drones for analysis. In the broader context of the September 2025 escalation, these preparations reflect a Ukrainian doctrine of inverse attrition warfare, where selective strikes in Kursk alleviate pressure on fronts like Pokrovsk, where Russia reported 90+ attacks on September 22. Independent analyses, such as the Russia Matters record card from September 17, indicate that Russian territorial gains in Ukraine have been minimal, 226 square miles between August and September, with the Ukrainian foothold in Kursk and Belgorod shrinking to 3 square miles for the first time since July 2025. This underscores the effectiveness of Ukrainian preparation, not only in strikes but in long-term sustainability. For example, the integration of drones with artillery has enabled combined operations, as reported in the ISW on September 21, where Ukraine countered Russian advances in northeastern Sumy. Logistically, Ukraine has invested in domestic production to mitigate external dependencies. Factories in the western part of the country, such as in Lviv, assemble FPV drones with imported components, reaching rates of 500 units per week according to Kyiv Post estimates. In Kursk, this translates into the capacity to launch repeated swarms, like the one on September 19 that damaged the 810th Brigade. The training also incorporated lessons from past campaigns. In the 2025 Sumy offensive, where Russia crossed the border in response to Kursk, Ukraine adapted tactics for similar terrain, emphasizing mobility and evasion. Ukrainian sources report that these preparations reduced losses by 30% compared to August operations, thanks to digital simulations modeling Russian responses based on historical data. Finally, the strategic preparation considered humanitarian and political impacts. Strikes in Kursk have been designed to minimize civilian casualties, focusing on military targets, although the border's proximity has complicated this, with reports of Russian evacuations in May 2025 due to propaganda about liberating the region. Ukraine has emphasized precision to maintain international support, coordinating with the UN for monitoring. In summary, these calculations not only prepared strikes, but a sustained campaign that forces Russia to reconsider its approach in Kursk.